For 39 nights, I followed my wolf into the forest like a man who had lost his mind. And on the 40th night, I understood why. Let me tell it from the beginning, because my counsel has been asking, and the version Kale would tell. If wolves told stories, which they do not, though I suspect mine wishes he could, would be entirely too pleased with itself. It started in the last week of harvest. I noticed Kale slipping away in the evenings, which was unusual. He is not a wolf who slips. He is broad as a cart horse, silver gray, and has terrorized 3 rival packs and one very unfortunate tax collector into complete cooperation. He does not slip. He lopes. He thunders. He arrives. But for a week, he had been easing out of the hold at dusk with the careful, sideways movement of a wolf who does not wish to be followed. I followed him. He went to the tree line at the eastern edge of our territory, where the river path bends and the oaks grow close enough that the cottage tucked behind them is easy to miss unless you know to look. I had not known to look. I knew it now. He went up to the steps, set something down, a river stone, pale and the size of a walnut, and sat. Just sat. He looked at the closed door for a while with an expression I had never seen on him, which was the expression of an animal utterly at peace with a decision he had made. Then he stood, shook himself, and walked home past me without acknowledging me at all. I stood in the dark for a long moment. Then I went home too. The next evening he went again. A hawk feather this time. Long, dark-banded, very fine. He sat, he looked at the door, he left. I asked the Hold's senior healer if there was any fever that caused a wolf to bring gifts to strangers. She looked at me for a moment and said no. I asked if there was any condition that caused a wolf to look peaceful. She said not that she had documented. I thanked her and went back to my study and sat with my hands flat on the table for a while. By the end of the second week, the gifts had included 4 more river stones of varying size, 2 hawk feathers and one from something smaller, a twist of dried clover, a sprig of something that smelled strongly of pine resin, and what I eventually identified as a very small and inexplicable pine cone. The door of the cottage had not opened once. I began to look forward to the evenings in a way I found difficult to explain, even to myself. The walk to the tree line, the particular quality of the light through the oaks at dusk. The way Kale sat in front of that closed door, entirely unbothered, as if showing up was the whole job, and whatever happened next was a detail. I told no one. If my council had known that the Alpha King of Caldenmere was spending his evenings standing in the dark behind his wolf while his wolf paid court to a closed door, the administrative fallout would have been considerable. On the 22nd night, a lamp came on inside the cottage. Kale's ears moved forward. Nothing else changed. He sat until the lamp went out, then walked home. I stood in the trees with something warm and directionless sitting in the middle of my chest and thought, I should stop coming. I came back the next night. The thing in my chest, I should be clear, was not something I associated with Kael's situation. I had told myself firmly that what I felt on the walk to the tree line was concern for my wolf's mental health. The pull I felt toward the clearing was secondhand, merely a tracking instinct. The fact that I had started arriving slightly earlier each evening so as not to miss the walk, that was efficiency. I am the Alpha King of Caldenmere. I am not a man who is undone by lamplight in a cottage window. I am not. On the 38th night, the door opened. She was slight, unhurried, with a kind of face that suggested she found most things quietly interesting and very few things alarming. She smelled of dried herbs and river water and something I did not have a name for, something that made the pull in my chest stop being secondhand and become entirely abruptly its own. She looked at Kale, who was sitting on her step, holding a sprig of lavender in his mouth and doing his very best impression of a wolf who had just happened to be passing. Then she looked past him into the dark, directly at me. You can come in, she said. Both of you. I opened my mouth to say that I was merely ensuring my wolf was not behaving dangerously on the property of a pack member, which was a reasonable and dignified explanation that I had in fact prepared. What I said instead was nothing, because Kael had already walked through the door and I followed him in. Her name was Fen. She had been keeping the herb cottage at the tree line for 3 years, trading dried remedies with the pack's healers and living, she said, very contentedly by herself. The cottage was warm and smelled of everything she did. Lavender, pine resin, something green and clean. And she had built up the fire before opening the door as if she had known we were coming. She had, it turned out. I have known you were there for at least 3 weeks, she said, pouring water into a pot. The second week, it was only him. The third week, there were 2 sets of footsteps. I was ensuring his safety, I said. She smiled at her pot. Of course. Kale was lying in front of her hearth with the absolute confidence of an animal who had been given something he had wanted for a long time. His eyes were half closed. He looked like a wolf who had solved a problem and was waiting for the other parties to catch up. We talked for 2 hours. I do not remember exactly what we said. Her work, a difficult autumn, the behavior of the river when it flooded 3 years back, but I remember that it was easy in a way that conversation had not been easy for me in longer than I could name, and that the pull in my chest, instead of fading as it usually did when I identified its cause and dismissed it, grew steadily more certain the way a fire grows when you stop apologizing for adding wood to it. When I walked home that night, I understood that the situation had changed. What I did not yet understand was that the change had been accomplished long before I walked through the door. On the 40th night, I brought nothing. I had not thought to bring anything, which was itself information, because Kale had been bringing something every single evening for 5.5 weeks, and I had been watching him do it without once thinking to bring something of my own. I stood outside the cottage in the dark and noticed this about myself and felt something that was a long way from my dignity. She had the door open before we reached the step. We sat by her fire again. She poured tea. I watched her hands on the pot, steady, unhurried, the same as everything else about her. And I was in the middle of thinking, with great clarity, that I had been a very slow and foolish man when I felt it. The warmth started at my left wrist. Not heat exactly, more the sensation of something that had been held very still for a long time finally being allowed to move. I looked down. The mate mark was there, gold in the firelight, fine and bright on my skin, and it was new and it was not new, because somewhere underneath it was the feeling that it had always been there, waiting for the exact moment I stopped standing in the trees. Across the table, Fen had set the teapot down. She was looking at her own wrist. The same mark, the same light. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Kale, from the hearth, exhaled through his nose. It was the most satisfied sound I have heard any creature make in my 38 years alive. He has known for 40 days, I said. I suspected something like that, she said. I looked at the wolf, who looked back at me with the steady, unhurried patience of an animal who has done the work and is waiting for acknowledgement. I thought about the river stones, the feathers, the lavender, the pine cone, which I still had not entirely understood, but which in retrospect had a certain logic. He was courting you, I said, on my behalf, for 5.5 weeks. It did seem that way, she said. He has very good taste in stones, I said. I would like to do that properly, if you are willing. She looked at me for a moment, not weighing, not measuring, just looking, the way she had looked at everything in this cottage, as if she found me quietly interesting and not particularly alarming. All right, she said. The next morning I stood before my assembled council with Fen beside me and Kale at her feet and named her before all of them, briefly. There was no ceremony for this that anyone had prepared. My head counselor, Drevin, opened his mouth twice and closed it again. 3 of the younger wolves were watching Kale with an expression I recognized as the one I had worn for 5 weeks, bafflement shading into reluctant acceptance. Kale sat with his chin up and his tail still, and the air of a problem, finally, fully solved. Fen thanked them all and asked if anyone needed anything for a cough, as she had noticed the season turning and had brought extra preparations. The council has learned to live with this. Drevin has in fact developed a persistent cough that I am nearly certain is real. Kale brings Fen riverstones still, from time to time. Smaller ones now, mostly left on the kitchen windowsill, which she lines up in a row and seems genuinely pleased by. I have started finding my own stones. I think, getting better at it.